Welcome back to Practical Product Management, the podcast. Today we're going to talk about Fintech and product management, which I think is, no matter what else we do, will always be a little near and dear to our little Fintech nerd hearts. So,
big Fintech nerd hearts.
yes, our big Fintech nerd hearts. So this came from a user or a watcher, a viewer, who asked me, given your backgrounds, is there anything unique and special you need as a product manager to be in fintech? And I thought, well, that's a good topic. That'll be fun because, kind of, and also no. So what do you think about that question? Maybe we should start by defining fintech a bit. Should we start there? Okay.
I think we should start there.
So what's your definition of fintech?
Fintech's a weird word, and I think people use it in multiple ways.
Yeah.
And like a language and lexicon is kind of my jam. Like I always think that people use the same word to mean different things. And I think fintech's one of those words. When I say fintech, I think it means technology related to financial transactions, whether that's like new disruptive fintech or like mainframes in a bank.
Yeah.
That's fintech for me. What do you think?
Yeah. So I regularly say that I was in fintech before it was called fintech because I started working in payments in 2001, right? And so spent a lot of my career. I have a 23-year career. I think I've spent 16 or 17 years in payments and fintech, right? And fintech is a relatively new word, while payments is not, right? Like the payments industry has been around for a long time. And I agree with you. I think fintech is everything that is technology related to financial payments, transactions, exchanges. And I think that there are sort of relevant areas that are considered fintech. So insurtech, wealth management, investment, lending. I think you start talking about also areas of nuance like Bitcoin, which is definitely in this space, but also definitely sits in a different bucket. Blockchain, like all of these things play a role in fintech, right? Or are part of fintech. But also there are, card brands and acquirers and issuers and, giant companies who have fintech arms, and so I think it's really broad. And people tend to get sort of nuanced about it. And I'm like, it's really this big, not this big. Right. So
I think they're really interesting. And so like, just for those of you that don't know us, for those of you that don't know us yet, just to sort of like level set, because I agree with you, Leah. Why don't you just sort of hit your previous experience in what we just defined as fintech, just to sort of help people understand the lens we're coming at this from.
Sure. So let's see. My first product management job was at a company who did ACH and credit card processing as an acquirer processor. And I was an ACH product manager. So my expertise was in really bank and ACH transactions through the Federal Reserve. I then went to work for an acquirer, right? Who was one of the largest in the US. And I also went to work for a payment gateway. So I worked for a gateway who did some of the very first transactions for software, specifically for Square. I then worked at Amazon and was specifically responsible for transaction processing, which is everything from wallet tokenization, the flow, where it goes, how it goes, where, the what we call the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, out to the processor and back. So I owned all of those pieces, which is tiny. I worked for a company that built a payment method, buy now, pay later. So I've done that. And then I've worked for companies that had payments as a core part of the business in travel, health tech, etc. Right. So I think that covers the majority of what I've done.
You probably missed a few.
But I might have missed a few nuances, right? But I'm even I guess at Amazon, I also worked in sort of business to business payments and lending. So I also worked in that space. So
So you know a
yeah.
few things.
Yeah, I know a little bit. What about you?
Uh, yeah, so I have worked at a retail foreign exchange brokerage. So I understand how banks do foreign exchange and how that
Yeah,
translates to what people are able to do from a trading perspective. I then went to Amazon where I worked on the foreign currency platform for both
yeah.
purchasing and for seller disbursement.
Thanks
I
for that, by the
also,
way.
oh, you're welcome. Do you use that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got money in all kinds of places. Thanks for doing that.
I worked on the platform that was that underpinned the authoritative seller balances as well as the Amazon digital coins.
Yeah,
Um, I worked in payments for AWS, which is really interesting because it's sort of microtransactions on credit cards, and then
yeah,
it's the very large corporate transactions and how
yeah,
you manage that globally. I spent time at Citibank, which kind of is a bank.
yeah,
Um, I was at a ticketing place where we did payments globally, and we had to understand payment
yeah,
methods globally. I've done some work uh, back when I was with a much larger company on how you move money globally around from like currencies like you know Brazilian real, where it's very hard to sort of repatriate, and how do you
yeah,
move money globally. I spent time at Mastercard as a network,
yeah,
understanding how payment transactions flow and what that looks like.
yeah.
And most recently, I'm now with a biotech firm, and we just released payments for, uh, business to business
Right,
payments. So, eh,
right.
I've
A little bit of something, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, even when we think about what we did together at Amazon, like there was both sides of the transaction. We were building a
yeah,
point of sale Amazon product, which has lived on in different versions, right? And we were on the other side holding funds for merchants using some of the marketplace tools that are there, but also building new marketplace tools so that we could deliver funds to people in 15 minutes, which no one else was
yes,
doing at the time, right? So we were literally, if you bought a cup of coffee, that merchant had your money in 15 minutes and could spend it on
yeah,
Amazon, right? And so we were doing those kinds of things. And then while I was there, and I know you were there as well, like we were doing things like launching American Express in India or launching a new payment method for taking cash in Japan, or like all these very discrete things that were very localized payment methods all
yeah,
came into the same platform within
yeah,
payments, right? And then like you said with AWS, we were like, the payments platform was like, we can't handle it, you'll have to do that yourselves, good luck. Right? So, and that, I think that was just one of the, I always talk about that generally at Amazon nobody could do anything unless they came through the platform, but there were some exceptions like AWS where we said we can't handle these microtransactions. We would have to we'd have to build something new anyway, so why don't you build it,
yeah,
right? And so I mean there like there's so many little discrete decisions to be made in payments, right? And I think it's just really fascinating, all of the little bits and pieces. So that, I think it's really why once a payments geek, always a payments geek.
yeah. I agree. And I think the most interesting thing about payments from a product perspective is you're largely invisible to the consumer
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
on either side, whether it's disbursements or payments.
yeah,
Your job is to be invisible.
yeah, totally, totally.
It's not a like put a new button somewhere. Like magic
Right.
needs to
Like,
happen.
yes,
Complex
yeah,
complex transaction flows need to look like magic.
yeah. And the truth is, almost everyone is a customer. There's
Yeah.
very few people who aren't, right? Like, not only those of us who are building it, but everyone out there is a customer. I even worked for a startup where we were building banks in a box for the unbanked, people who didn't have ID and couldn't pass money around in the US banking system. And so we were building solutions for them that were very much like casino systems, right? And so we were using the same technology. So, I mean, everyone is a customer in some form or fashion
Yeah.
because people need to be able to pay bills and move money from point A to point B. And so there
Yeah.
are systems underneath that, right? So it's super, super, super fascinating.
I love
So
it.
like,
Which brings us to your question.
yeah. Yeah. So the question is like, what does a product manager need in order to be fintech product manager? Is it any different than all the other things we've talked about product managers need?
What do you think, Leah?
I mean, I don't think it's really all that different. I do think you are, if you're going to be real good at it, you're going to probably have to get some expertise or some experience in understanding how money moves, like
Yeah.
what happens behind the scenes. And I think there is a whole element of this that is about security and compliance
Mm,
that not every product you touch as a product manager necessarily has. I mean, security more and more, right? But compliance, not as much. I do think that the other industry that's similar is healthcare, right? Like just the kind of the data you're holding and what you have in your hands is so special and precious that you have to treat it as such, right?
yeah.
So I think that that makes a difference. But those are all, in my mind, things you can learn on the job. Like who walks in knowing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I 100% agree with you. I
Yeah,
think that I think it's the same, and it depends
yeah, yeah, totally, totally
because it
agree.
really is just it's understanding a complex system and finding a way to help users solve their problem.
Yeah,
And you know, largely in an invisible way. Again, like I think some of the best products just work.
yeah,
Um, and I think a lot of the challenge in fintech, the broader term of fintech that we just described, is that it's largely undisrupted.
right,
We
right.
accept some pretty crappy experiences as people, as users, as humans.
Yeah,
Um, we accept some pretty bad stuff
yeah,
because there's the concept that it's hard and it's
right,
difficult and
right.
um,
I mean, it's
yeah,
to me. I think we've talked about it. Like there are things that I will do to log into my bank account or whatever I'm using to move money around, pay my bills, etc. That I would not do if I were just trying to buy, dog food, right? That I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I'll click this button and I'll find this code and I'll do, and I will jump through hoops that I know as a product person are likely highly unnecessary, but the friction is just like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. And so the friction stays in and I'm like, fine, just take my firstborn, just let me get my money, right? Like I don't have a firstborn, so it's okay. But
and I do think like that's so one of the with my with the limited experience that I have in this space. So let's just start from there. I'm going to try to be a little humble.
yeah,
I think a lot of the challenges that you face or I face on a daily basis when dealing with some of these larger entities is that they're not actually they're surfacing their org chart and their application,
yes,
and they're not biasing on what the customer really needs. And I think that there's two
right,
reasons for that, right? One, large companies. So let's talk about companies that were really founded and developed before um, tech.
yeah,
We'll define that term
yeah,
later.
yeah,
They were paper based and they were process
yeah,
based, and they had
yep,
people, and people took a piece of paper from here to there, and we got stamps, and shit happened.
yep,
Um, when they went to digital, and digital is like this buzzy word that everybody says that makes my head explode. I really hate it. When they went to digital, they digitized the process
yeah, 100%,
and they left the silos and the misfunction. And, you know, this part of the company doesn't talk to that part of the company. And there's no holistic notion of the person
yeah,
across systems. You ever wonder why, like, when you apply for a mortgage, they can't like pre-populate half that shit because they
right,
already know you. They've got your bank account information, but they
right,
cannot.
right,
And that is, I don't want to say it's lazy, but it would take a lot for a
right,
company that's grown up a couple hundred years with paper processes
right,
to think fundamentally different about the process.
right,
And I do
yeah,
think like good product managers in in this space think about the user out and disintermediate the complexity.
yeah,
And I think that's why like more digital fintechs,
yeah,
have a first mover advantage that some of the bigger companies are going to really struggle to fight
Yeah.
against.
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, you and I both know because we've worked in this kind of space, like some of the companies that are major players in the fintech and payment space still run mainframes somewhere in, Georgia, right? Or whatever, like Virginia, right? And there's a mainframe over there, and some guy named Carl, who's 78, is still logging in every day and making things happen. And you're like, okay, that sounds terrible, right? But
Yeah.
there's some of that legacy that's there is so hard to lift. I mean, if you just think about 10 years ago in the US, the concept of a card with a chip and pin was like rocking our world. What were we going to do? Meanwhile, in Europe everybody was already doing it,
Yeah.
right? But it's because like I always liked to try to explain to people, when you start something, the legacy tends to like really follow you while everyone else can innovate against your legacy,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
I think that's one of the problems in this space, is that the newcomers are like, oh, those are crusty old guys don't know what they're doing. And I'm like, those crusty old guys are what you base all your shit on.
Yeah. That's the foundation of everything.
Right? So, I mean, that some of that legacy, those systems, those things that are really core, they're in there and they're hard to disrupt. And but the people sitting on top of them or outside of them or who are just connecting to them are like, fancy, fancy, fancy. Look at our fancy, and you're just like, why can't those guys do that? And it's like, there are some reasons,
Yeah.
right?
I think the
So,
risk is if you are if you're a core company, and the risk is you're going to get commoditized.
yeah, yeah,
Like the value is no longer in your house.
right,
And so, I mean, this is where, like, I think product thinking, and actually, a while back we had a conversation with someone who is in growth product
right,
as a company that has a commodity that is in the that has the potential to be disrupted or have
right,
your innovation capabilities superseded.
right,
It's really important for you to think about how you're approaching the market from an
right,
ecosystem perspective. How are you looking at growth? You can't be lazy and really just think
right,
about your thing is we can never go away. We're the commodity. You will get commoditized, and that's a race to zero.
right.
I
Totally,
actually had
totally.
someone, Leah, once tell me, with all seriousness, well, we're not really worried about the tech companies because, like, Amazon and Apple, like, they don't have wallets. They don't know the customer identity. How do you feel about that?
Oh, that's precious. That's so sweet and not true. Right? I mean, yeah, I think there is I think a lot of users would be like, oh, I just go to Amazon and I give them my credit card and then I buy the thing and then that's it. And meanwhile, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Starbucks, these companies are all holding massive amounts of money either in their wallet or the access to your money instantaneously, that maybe you didn't even like think, oh, they're holding all my credit card data and da, 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 like all these things. And it's insane to not really think about the fact that those companies are financial companies.
They are financial companies. They are payments companies. They're fintech companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of them are
Absolutely.
regulated fintech companies,
Exactly.
right? Some of them are trying like hell not to be a bank
Yeah.
because they
But
don't
they're
want to be
almost
even further regulated, right? And so I mean, they have whole legal teams that are just making sure they stay on this side of the banking line,
there.
just barely, so that they don't have to be a bank and have all that regulation, right? And I think it's that's also in my mind one of the responsibilities of being a fintech product manager, is that you understand something about what your customer information and how your customers are interacting with you that they may not even understand,
Yes.
and you have a responsibility,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
I do like
go ahead.
No, no, no. I was going to say I go back to this fact that it's fully fledged product management. Just because there's not a website that you can point to and be
Right.
like, that's my thing.
Right.
Your thing is critical. It
Yeah.
is critical infrastructure. It moves money around in a secure way, and it is largely invisible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're actually
100%.
some of the coolest products. I mean, you and I have worked on some pretty cool
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's what
they're
I
some of the
always say. If anybody ever wants to take a swipe at me about anything, I always say, well, there's something on your phone that I touched. I know that there's something I built that is in your phone in one of those apps that you love to go to. So you're welcome. Right? Like you can, that's fine. Something I did makes your life easier. You're welcome.
yeah.
Right?
You're welcome.
And
Now regulation's interesting, and I want to sort of like
yeah,
poke at that just for a minute because you
yeah,
you brought that up as a responsibility of a product manager in the space. I think it's really important.
yeah.
And I also think I'm going off topic a little bit. I'm sorry, and I
That's
also
okay.
think it's the difference between what I would call a more digital native
Hmm.
company and a company that was founded before, that has its roots before digital
Yeah,
BD.
yeah,
Um, Regulation is often in a paper-based society, layers upon layers. And in
yeah,
fact, there's strict rules and regulations, and everybody takes the thing and checks the box because that's keeping us safe.
yeah,
But in a lot of cases, we've lost the intention behind the thing. Like you cannot
yes,
directly tie this check mark to the control, to the opinion that the legal
yeah,
has, to the to the regulatory body statement. Like
yeah,
that lineage has been lost, and so you can never change the process.
right.
It layers on itself like the never ending jawbreaker of doom.
Yeah,
Whereas your digital first companies actually look at compliance by automation.
yeah,
And so understanding the regulation, understanding the legal opinion around the regulation, and then being able to build audit requirements that happen as
yeah,
digital exhaust
yeah.
versus a checkbox, move the paper process. And I actually think that's sort of, if I had to draw a line and
Hmm.
say, this is the future of fintech
Yeah,
and where finance is going to go, and this is the history. This is the blockbuster that hasn't quite gone away yet,
right,
but
right.
is looking to get commoditized,
Yeah,
and will shrink over time. That I
hmm,
think is the line.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really important line. I think, what's funny is what comes to my mind is that, 10 years ago, now a little bit more, 12 years ago, I remember somewhere in a regulatory spec of a card brand, it said, you cannot do a tip for more than 10% of the transaction. And I was like, well, what does that
Wow.
mean? What does that mean if the coffee only costs 250?
Yeah.
Right? And so I remember that the very first thing I took on when I came to Amazon was trying to get some sort of blessing to tip higher than, I think it was 25%. It was 25% to tip higher than 25% because we knew we were going to be doing very small transactions and that
Yeah.
somebody might want to leave $1 for their $3
Cop.
coffee, right?
Yep.
And that was against the spec, which meant that we would be processing transactions that were out of regulation with the card brand. And so I was like, okay, we're going to go get some permission. And if they say no, then we're just going to ask for forgiveness later because this is a minor infraction. So these are the decisions that as a product manager we were making. I
Yeah.
think in these digital first businesses, a lot of the big tech companies that kind of forged the way on these, like, let's push the needle here. This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense in the gaming space where kids are buying something for 99 cents. This doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. And there were little, because there was a time when if you processed a transaction under $1 on Amex, it caused your card to get canceled. I remember because I canceled some people's cards.
I did not know that. $1.
When Yeah, so if we ran a test, I actually yeah, Ksenia got her Amex canceled because we ran a test transaction when we were testing at Amazon. She's like, they just called me from Amex, my card's been canceled and they're reissuing me a new card. What did you do? And I'm all, I ran a transaction for 75 cents. And
Oh my
she's like,
gosh.
well, apparently that's not allowed. like the things that we didn't know in that really kind of labor intensive legacy world,
Yeah.
that companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Starbucks and Google and these companies, Apple, have done a lot of that legwork so that the digital first companies just, they don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
They just do shit. They're processing little wealth management transactions and Bitcoin transactions and and magic is happening
Yeah.
because labor, sweat equity was put into overcoming how those non-digital companies were thinking so that we could move them forward,
Yes.
right? And I'm just using that example because it always makes me laugh to the look on someone's face when they were like, my car just got canceled, right? And I'm
We
like,
need, we
sorry,
need to
I didn't know that was a thing, right?
we need to tag her in this post and find out what she's doing and if she remembers that. I think that, I mean, but that is a pattern that exists and is very prevalent. If you think about
Yeah,
like a Stripe,
yeah,
remember what a pain in the ass it used to be to try to get a payment system up, and
yes,
they made integrating with a payment
yeah,
provider trivially easy.
yeah,
They solved a problem,
yeah,
and created an ecosystem,
hmm, yeah. I
a
mean,
huge ecosystem, right?
huge ecosystem, and they could skip some steps because they had been skipped before them, right? Before it
Yep.
ever got to them, right? um and I think I think that those companies, they then have multiple channels. They can work with huge companies, they can work with small businesses, individuals. They then have a breadth of sales opportunities and channels they can go to because they've kind of they've gotten to skip over some of that heavy lift, right?
Because a product manager somewhere worked on a problem on behalf of a customer.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you guys got two answers out of this very poignant question. One is like, what do we think about the whole fintech industry? And you get that
Right.
one for free. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Uh,
You're welcome.
and is it
Yeah,
different to be a product manager in this industry?
yeah.
Uh, how would you answer that? Do we answer that in the standard way, Leah, and just say, I
It
don't think
depends.
it's different, but I think it depends.
Yeah, totally. I totally think, yeah, I do think it depends, right? I think there are, one of the questions I have for you, because this is somewhere where you have skills that are far beyond mine, like, is there a difference in terms of what is expected in the actual customer experience, right? Like we were talking a little bit about how clunky it can
Yeah,
be, but I think about, and I use this example a lot. Like the fact is the Amazon checkout payments checkout experience is not brilliant, but it's so routine that every company tends to follow it.
yeah,
And as we've talked about in the past, like it doesn't even matter what language it's in. I know what's going to happen. And even if I go to a different website, if they use that same series of events, I roughly know what to do. And I'm
yeah. You're
like,
trained.
right? I'm
There's
well
now a new
trained.
pattern. But
Right.
before online shopping was ubiquitous, it could have happened a million different ways. But now
Right.
there's a pattern that people expect.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I think it's so, as someone who really cares about the user experience, I think
Yeah.
sometimes the user experience is invisible.
Yeah.
And I think that relates, it's not to, and for all of you product managers out there that believe you need to like have an experience and like you angst over what it's going to look like and you care about the like how rounded your buttons are, I will tell you, if you're not thinking about how to make it as seamless and as simple as possible to the point of
Right.
not being there almost, especially in this space,
Right.
then you're doing your user a disservice. You're
Yeah.
you're glorifying your work and trying to put it as something you can point to. And
Yeah.
some of the most beautiful things that I think that probably you and or I ever built don't exist. They get rid of
Right.
an experience. And I
Yes.
think the one that's my favorite example and probably the most interesting heavy lift is, do you remember when we were talking about how long a customer would stand at a point of purchase and wait for a response?
Yep.
How long? Yes,
Yes, I do.
we had lots of conversations about this.
I remember.
How long should it take for this transaction to go from someone's iPad or a phone and how many hops was it going to take? And then how long did it have to come back before someone's going to start to experience dissatisfaction? Um,
Would you like the numbers on that?
I would love that. Please do remind me.
Yes. It was from the I want to buy this
Yep.
round trip and out. It was 23 steps. It with 2 seconds at the processor.
Yeah. Not good enough for
They
a customer.
Chase and Visa had 2 seconds. When we first started doing it, it was taking us 5.5 to 7.5 seconds. It needed to take sub 3, which meant we had to take 20 or 21 of the hops had to happen sub second,
Yeah.
including tokenizing and detokenizing in multiple spots.
And allowing for someone to be in a low network zone, which
Yes.
increases
Yes.
latency.
And at Amazon, what was unique about it is it was an anonymous transaction.
Yes.
They were unknown. We were running transactions through a platform who always knew their users and could fall back to a different payment method, could do all these tricky things in the online space. This was an anonymous transaction, 23 hops, 2 seconds belonged to someone else, and we had to get it below 3.
That was one of my favorite
There.
problems to work on with you. And then
So, me too.
to add to that, like you just sort of brought up something. People always talk about product management in terms of happy path. Like, oh, I made
Yeah.
a website. If you click this happens. What happens when your network is low? What happens if your payment method? What happens if a
Yes.
response times out, doesn't come back in time?
Yes.
There
Yeah.
are hundreds of non-happy path scenarios that need to just work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think we forget that. I mean, and what feels normal today. So if you think that 4G and 5G is what's normal today, it wasn't normal 12 years ago.
No.
And it won't be normal 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So everybody's solving. There are lots of product managers sitting out there trying to solve for how do I get this to work in a 4G network and how do I get to work won't even that problem that you work on and labor over will just vapor and vanish someday,
Yep.
and you'll be like, man, I spend a lot of emotional labor on that. Right.
I spent you and I spent a lot of emotional labor on that problem that you just
Yes.
described.
Yes. Yes. I mean, hell, we spent a lot of time talking about return codes. There were, I don't know, 300 return codes, one of which was take the person's card and cut it up. And
How do
we
you
said,
return that when the customer's got the
hell no. Do not do that. Just
Yes.
decline the transaction and send them on their way. We are not having some little coffee shop cut up cards like it's
Nana at
Macy's.
the farmer's
Right.
market for jelly, and it pops up into Bruce's like return screen that Nana's going to take your card. It's not happening. You
But
have
I
to
mean, those are the
understand.
kinds of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of shit that we were thinking about back then. Like, what do we do with this return code? And it's like, not a damn thing. Just return a
Yeah.
decline and move on. Right.
Nana, just tell Bruce to give you a different payment method.
Just,
Pay
do you
cash
have
for the
another
jam.
thing? Do you have cash? Otherwise, you can't have the jam. Get out.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the things we labor over technology wise today in fintech and in any product. But I think in fintech, it's the speed at which things are changing is,
Yeah.
I mean, crazy. I mean, when I said I was an ACH product manager, the Federal Reserve was still flying planes to move checks from this region to that region. There were still fleets of planes. When my first year in product management, there was a plane crash in the Federal Reserve, and we didn't know what to do because there were checks on the plane that just. And what do you do? Like, we don't know which checks they were. Right? We had to go the Federal Reserve had to do a quick hustle to try to just figure out which checks were. So that seems like so yeah, that was quite a while ago. It was 25 years ago, but 25 years is a fast
Yeah.
pace to have it all totally change
Yeah.
completely. Right?
It's only going to get worse. I mean, I do
Yeah.
think like it's been 10 years or whatever since people were like, OMG, Bitcoin
Right.
and the blockchain are going to blow up everybody's lives. I don't think that's true. I do think this sort of some of these features and the ability to create a network that's independent of the networks
Yeah.
is really interesting. And as soon as we
Right.
figure out how to make these wallets more portable and more accessible, I do think the
Yeah.
game starts to change.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
people that are at risk of being commoditized are at risk of being commoditized.
Right.
But
Right. And
again,
you
you
either
probably ought to have some great product managers thinking about these
right
problems.
having some of those conversations and saying, what do we need to do? I mean, I think about even as a product manager in the fintech and payment space, often wherever you are feels like it's the most important, you know, place, right? In
Yeah.
terms of if you are a product manager in Sweden, you think that's the most important way that money moves around. And then you try to take your Swedish product and put it in another market and go, I mean, why won't the Germans use this? And it's like, well, because the Germans carry cash in their
Yeah.
pocket, right? Until the pandemic happened, right? And so even just as a product manager, being very market aware takes
Yeah.
so much work, right? Like in the APAC region, people expect to use their phones for everything.
Yes.
If you go to some parts of Europe, you will have to go to an ATM and get money to pay for your dinner because the person says, I don't, we only accept cash. And you're like, I don't know we've eaten. Like, where's the nearest ATM, right?
Like, can I leave you, my kid? Like,
Right. Do you want
I'm
my
not going to pay off
wallet?
for you.
Right. Do you want to keep my friend while I go to the ATM? Right. Like it's literally that those differences are super dramatic. Um,
Yeah.
and very overcomable when you have digital solutions, right? That are fast. But again, those legacy kind of old school systems don't always flex as easy. So then they often find themselves in need of those local payment solutions and are
Yes.
like, please, could we work with you? Right. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
I
that's
think this
another
brings
way
up
I think
another
that,
topic we
yeah.
should put on our backlog. There is a case for so we talk about making things easy and we talk about solving customer problems and we talk about making
Yeah.
things simple, but there are a whole bunch of use cases for when you want to intentionally slow the user down.
Yes. Yes.
And I think we should talk about with someone at some stage, it's just like user behavior design.
Yeah. Yes.
And
I
it's
love
not
that.
always about invisible or simple. It may be about making you pause or making
Yeah.
it feel harder because you want the customer to feel more secure.
Right. Yeah.
There are
Totally.
like that would be a really fun conversation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And
Cool.
I do think that sometimes, even in some of these clunky fintech experiences, if you really stop and think about it, you're like, oh, that they're just slowing me down so that I feel like they care,
Yes.
right? And I'm like, oh, that's nice. Can I get a little faster here, right? Can we move?
They want
Can we
you to
move
see
this
the little
along?
secure lock logo. Remember,
Yeah.
like, remember
And I'm
how,
like,
like, how did we introduce the lock logo into our experiences? And like, look, it's safe.
yes,
Because we
yeah,
actually worked with people and they were like, I don't know what just happened. Actually,
right,
this reminds me of the story of when One Click launched in China.
yeah, yes,
And it freaked people out because they didn't know if it was secure or if this is what they
right,
wanted. It like
yes,
blew their minds.
hmm, yep.
Is this a real
I remember that.
transaction? Did it really happen? Was it
What
secure?
just
What just
happened?
happened to my money?
Yep, yep.
Um,
I mean, I sat in a room and convinced Amex that they couldn't throw an interstitial in India because people wouldn't proceed.
yeah,
And they wanted to throw up a screen. And I was like, no, they won't, they'll bail they won't
yeah.
finish the transaction. And they're like, oh, come on. And I was like, no, for real. Like, and so we had to get somebody from the Royal Bank of India to come in and be like, no, right? But it was such
Yeah.
a difference. They couldn't do it. Whereas here we're used to these 3D secure messages and this and that, like in the US and in Europe. But in that environment, they were like, no, absolutely not. It
Which,
will be seen as a faked transaction.
yeah, you've been
Okay.
intercepted, which is so
Yeah.
funny. And I love all my marketing friends and my very distant past. I was a marketer. But I watch people agonize over some of these experiences we put up. I
Yeah.
watch them, I watch them argue. I have seen people that are way too senior worry about where to put a link. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, here's my opinion. It doesn't fucking matter because we're wrong.
Right.
What matters is you got something up and you learned what people respond to and
Right.
you adjust.
Yeah.
Don't like make it pretty the first time, but understand you're already wrong.
Yeah.
You're already wrong.
100%. 100%.
That was
Yep.
my soapbox.
Yeah, no, it's so super, super true. I love it. No, and I mean, I think that there's so many, like, I would say to people, to product managers who want to be in fintech, are in fintech, and are kind of trying to figure out if they are unique and special unicorns or similar. Like we said, I think that you are a product manager, just like
Mhm.
any other product manager. And you may be watching things change right in front of you that don't feel revolutionary. And then you're like, whoa, that
Yeah.
changed something, right? Didn't know that was going to happen. And so be paying attention for those things and enjoy them when you see them. And when you get a chance to take a chance, take one, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes those little, I mean, I worked at a startup that took a risk taking Square's transactions, and it changed the landscape of payments to do those
Yeah.
transactions. Within 6 months, everybody wanted in that game.
Yep.
Those guys, and to be clear, just so for those of you who don't know this, the guys at Twitter built that on a weekend to use at a trade show. They built Square on their phones, like just over a course of a few days, weeks, because they needed to be able to take payments and didn't want to have to go buy a big device. And they weren't sure that they were going to have power, and they weren't sure they were going to have like all these things, right? And it turned into its own business. And that's one of the things about the fintech industry that can happen. Like somebody has a little idea about lending, and pretty soon they have a lend tech company. And when somebody's like, we should do insurance for Uber drivers that manages all the transactions, and now they're a whole company. And you have all these little things that come out of the the basically that whole experience that happens on the road. Whole companies are born out of those little nits that are part of a whole payments experience. And I think that's something that's fun if you like
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And we
Clearly we
always
do.
do. Exactly. That's what I jokingly say, that if you look at my resume, it's me trying to leave fintech.
Me
It's like
too.
fintech, 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 I'm leaving fintech, 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 I'm leaving fintech, fintech. Please.
Yeah. Even when you leave fintech, then you're like, oh yeah, I can do payments.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Watch, watch this. So yeah,
Oh my
no,
gosh.
I think it's important, and I think there is. So I think there is this. I am a product manager. I learned something about the financial sector and how money moves. I learned something about customers and what creates trust and security. I learned something about security and regulation and compliance. Congrats, you're a fintech product manager.
Yeah. And if you're a product manager not in fintech and you want to go into fintech, it's not an impossible barrier.
No.
It's the same set of skills.
Yeah.
It's the same approach. There's a different balance, right? You're not going to be so heavily
Yep.
focused on the UI. You're going to be more focused on the experience and how do you make it
Yeah.
seamless.
Yeah.
But it's product management.
Yeah. And I mean, I regularly have folks say, like, do you think I can get a job at this place or that place? I don't have any fintech experience. And I'm like, they could use someone with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yes, yes, yes,
they could
yes.
use
Because once
somebody.
you know too much, you know too much. And
Yeah.
like the one thing, my jam for all my product managers is do not fall in love with your solution. Like you've
Yes.
got to remain focused on your problem because once you put something out in the wild, the problem changes.
Yeah.
And if you're in love with your solution, someone's going to disrupt you.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And you can treat it like your baby, and you can love it, and you can think that it's the most beautiful thing. And also, you're going to have to, get a new baby.
Yeah.
Like it just happens, right? Like the very first product I ever built was the ability to take a picture of a check and deposit it at the bank. Who cares? Right? But at the time, that was like, I remember
Yeah.
blowing my dad's mind, right? With the idea that he could just take a picture of it or scan it or whatever. And then he was like, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just go to the bank? And I'm like, right, I know, dad. Right.
Okay. So love that you just brought your parents into this. Have you ever tried to explain to your parents what you do? And do they understand you? Because mine do not.
No, no. My dad would tell people like, "Oh, she knows how money moves around. She can explain, can do that." I mean, my mom thought I worked at the warehouse at Amazon, I think, because I think I remember telling you, my mom called me one time at work and said, "Do you know if you have a copy of," and rattled off some book. And I'm like, Amazon.com. Let me look that up. Yes, we do. And she's like, "Oh, do you think you could get me a copy?" And I'm all,
Let
"It'll
me
be there
just order
tomorrow."
it. She definitely thought you worked at the warehouse.
Yeah,
I
she
would
thought I
have
was.
people call me
Yeah.
and be like, "So, can you help me with my shipment?" And it's like,
No.
"Aunt Betsy, do you know what I do?" Like,
Yeah.
no.
I mean, my mom probably still tells people that I'm an accountant, right? And I
So
haven't been an accountant since 1998.
I mean, I would love to also have another episode where we invite people's parents on to explain to us what they do.
Yes.
And I can bring my mom and she can tell you that she doesn't know anything about what I
She's like,
do. I think she probably just
I
thinks
don't
I
know.
go to meetings.
Yeah. She's like, she goes to meetings and yeah, works in computers. That was the thing my parents would say. She works in computers. And I'm like, I don't work at Best Buy selling computers, just for the record. It's not what I do, right?
Nor can I help you with your email. Like,
No,
despite how cool you think I am, cannot help you with your
not going to
email.
help you. Yeah. So I mean, I think what is amazing to me is that in the course of my career, there are so many things that have changed. And even as I sit here now, there are parts of fintech that now are outside. I mean, I'm like, I don't know anything about that because I just haven't done it, right? Or I haven't been
Yeah,
involved, or I haven't. And so somebody will start telling me about something, and I'm like, what? What does it do? And then they start to explain it to me, and I'm like, wow, fascinating,
yeah,
And I think that's the beauty of an industry like this that you can follow across time. And I think that's one of the things about product management. Maybe we have to talk about this in the future too. Like, if you have a specialty, you will have the pleasure of watching change, right?
yeah,
If you are a product manager who does lots of things, that's also super fascinating, right? And I've done a little of that and a little of the other. But if you have an industry that you stick with, healthcare or travel or, whatever, you will find like, oh, wow, I got to watch all of this change. And I think fintech is one of the things that just will keep changing because it needs to change to meet the need of society,
yeah.
right? So, but yeah,
I love it.
so I love it too. And neither of us does it really
Yeah,
full
no,
time, right?
doesn't mean we don't love it.
Yeah,
It holds a
totally.
special place in my heart.
Yeah, me
Having
too.
said that, I find it equally infuriating and equally uplifting and inspiring.
Totally. Me too. Me too. And I think there are, yeah, I think if you go back and watch the episode I did with Greg Cohen about the Great Restoration, you'll see like there are even more shifts happening because of the market, because of the economy, because of what's happening in the world, because there's a lot of change that's happening very fast because of what's
Yeah,
going on in the world, right? And he's an old school payments guy too, right? And it's like, oh boy, this is moving quick, right? And I think yeah, there is some of it that is like terrifying, and some of it is like that's cool at the same time.
yeah, all at
So
the same time.
yeah, yeah. So in conclusion, if you want to be a fintech product manager, do it.
Please do.
It's a good idea. It can make a whole career out of it. That's a lot of fun. So awesome. All right, then we will see you next time.
See you later.